Hello, everyone. I think we are live. Welcome to our first edition of DEI Office Hours from Seed&Spark. Spoiler alert, I am not Emily. She is not joining us today after she's recovering from her second COVID vaccine shot. I am Stefanie Monge, she, her, the head of sales at Seed&Spark, and really excited today to talk with our special guests about distributing the work of DEI across the organization. So I'll hand it over to our guests to introduce themselves. Lara, if you could get started first.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Lara McLeod, pronouns she, her, and I lead our JEDI team and JEDI initiatives across Axon's organization. JEDI standing for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion here at Axon.
Welcome, Laura and Tara.
Hi, my name is Tara Robertson. I use she, her pronouns. I'm here in Vancouver, Canada, which is the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. I was an in-house diversity, equity, and inclusion leader at Mozilla for 3 years, and I started my own consulting company this January, and I'm working with a couple of different organizations partnering on their EDI strategies.
Excellent. Thank you. So we'll go ahead and get started. I think it makes sense to do some level setting here in terms of what do we even mean when we are talking about distributing the work of DEI across an org? What does that mean? Tara, could you get us started?
Sure. I think it's important for organizations to define what they mean by the work, and a top-level strategy is really key for that. When I talk to people, they often reach out and say, "Hey, can you help do anti-racism training?" It's like, okay, tell me about the whole plan. What are you doing? What are you focused on? Why do you think training is the first place to start? So I think having that clear, articulated strategy and including what you hope the future can look like, as well as what you're going to focus on right now. I think the other thing I hear a lot is people are overwhelmed and they don't know where to start. So picking a clear place to start and having that alignment across the company on what that is will help people in each department figure out how their work contributes to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Lara, what would you add to that?
Yeah, so I love where Tara was going with this around making sure you understand what the work means for your organization. DEI work in general does not look the same for each organization. You have to kind of discover your corporate social responsibility, what you want to do in the diversity, equity, inclusion space to further the narrative, to further equity, inclusion, belonging, both within your company, but also outside in the communities, right? And with that as well, once you kind of define what that looks like for your company, distributing the work really involves making sure that this isn't regulated to HR, right? We know that diversity, equity, and inclusion teams typically sit within HR as a subsect of that. And what I like to say is that this work needs to be business supported, but employee led. And so really, how do you get every employee engaged so that it's not only an HR problem or an underserved communities problem, but it's everyone's both problem and responsibility to move the needle in this space and giving every employee access to finding their role in this work.
Yeah, absolutely. Something that I think it's worth touching on, what does the J stand for in JEDI, Laura?
Yeah, absolutely. So the J stands for justice. So we have justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. Not only is it a fantastic acronym, right, that folks remember, but really why we included the justice piece is twofold, right? One, because really where we're going with all of the diversity, equity, inclusion work is just social justice, right? It's kind of a term that, especially from a corporate sense, people have kind of shied away from, but really what we're looking for is social justice and furthering, accelerating justice. With that, Axon also happens to be a company that is at the crux of our mission, focused on protecting life, accelerating justice. And so for us, that's really where the DEI work, rubber meets the road, is in this justice sector. How do we accelerate justice? How do we build racial equity, diversity, and inclusion into our criminal justice and law enforcement systems?
Yeah, thank you for that. And really just to kind of circle back on something you've both pointed out, as we think about what it means to distribute this work, it's really important to start by defining what we mean by that work, but also thinking about like, how do we distribute it equitably across the entire org versus asking the marginalized communities and team members to really lead that. So thank you so much for sharing that. What are some of the barriers that are faced in this work? And I'll kind of hand it over to whoever would like to lead with that.
I can jump in. So number one barrier is that piece about whose responsibility it is to take on this work, right? Too often, you have employees who either want to opt in when it serves them and opt out when it's uncomfortable, or who just aren't aware, right? It starts with awareness and understanding that this is something that affects all of us, and finding your why. I talk a lot about that in general, thinking of holistic strategies. We first start with trying to help everyone find their why as to why this is important for them. There's always a need for it because what we're talking about is something that touches each of our communities and each of us personally. The other barrier that I see a lot is just around understanding what a holistic strategy is and how long, and level setting how long that takes, right? We as practitioners know that it takes 3 to 5 years to just see cultural change internally, right? And change behaviors on a noticeable scale. And so helping the organization to see that, you know, this isn't a move the mountain in one day solution, right? This is really long term. We are never finished because frankly, like, let's talk about equity, right? Equity is a large question mark for many of the societies that we live in because we don't have equity. So we're doing something that doesn't necessarily have a defined ending. We're still kind of learning as we go along. We're all on our own learning journeys in this space. Nobody's just like an expert and knows everything. And so to be able to level set and say, this is going to take a lot longer than you think. The short wins are not always the best wins. And I hate to break it to you, but once we reach whatever 5-year commitments that we've set that are probably baseline, then we're going to figure out what our next commitments are. And there's no like check of the box that you can have here, right?
It's such an iterative process, is really the way that I describe it, and is so ongoing. You're right. Like, it isn't this destination. It's so much about like embracing that journey on the way. Tara, can you talk to us like from the perspective of working with like leadership and senior leaders? What are some of the barriers from their perspective when it comes to really starting to distribute this work across the org?
Yeah, so I think it is everyone's work in the organization, and leaders really need to lead. When I was thinking about this question ahead of time, I was like, what is the biggest barrier? And I think it's time. Like, I've been thinking a lot, like, time is the most precious resource we have, or that's where I'm at in my life. And the strategy is like, where are we going to spend time? And where are we not spending time? So with all the business pressures that leaders have, this needs to be important, and the senior leaders really need to lead. And the ultimate accountability has to sit there. So I think we can distribute the work, but senior leaders are the ones who are like, that's where the buck stops. That's where it stops for business decisions. It's where it stops when businesses are wildly successful. Like, we hold up our leaders, and when things go wrong, leaders own that accountability and carry that weight on their shoulders. So I think totally agree with Lara that this isn't work that should be in HR. There needs to be a strong partnership with HR because there's a lot of levers on the people side that we need to think about around how we hire, how we promote, how we do succession planning. And that's one part of the business. Like, how are we marketing our products and services? Like, what are our products and services? Like, who are we designing for? What problems are we trying to solve? And like, who are our customers? Who's not being served by the things we're doing? So I think it goes across the whole organization, and leaders need to value this. They need to make it part of their formal accountability goals. Like, if a company is using OKRs, it needs to be a top line OKR. And then people can allocate their time to do that work.
Right. So, yeah, like, I agree. Like, I think that when we place something as a business level OKR, and also, what if we attached like compensation to these outcomes as a very visible sign of accountability. And to your point of like leaders leading, like exactly, like leading by example, and really showing that authentic commitment and understanding that, back to this idea of it being an iterative process, like we're gonna mess up, like it's gonna be imperfect. And I think also being able to model behavior in those instances as well, to just show that, like, you know, we are all on this like journey together. I think that journey part really resonated with me. Laura, did you have something else you wanted to add? Or
yeah, I was going to say that just reminded me of a barrier that I often think is probably one of the biggest barriers, is this fear of being vulnerable or messing up, right? When we talk about leaders leading, leaders have the same fears as everybody else. And oftentimes what I say is that to leaders, especially leaders from non-marginalized, non-underserved backgrounds, I always say that, you know, it seems like it's easier for people from underserved communities to talk about discrimination, oppression, anything in the social justice realm. It's not easier. We're just used to doing it because we have to. And so you will mess up. I mess up on a daily basis. Everybody messes up, right? Because we've all been socialized. We've all been trained and learned the same ways. And so trying to break down those barriers to say, it's okay if you say the wrong thing, if you learn from it. And frankly, as a leader, it's actually empowering for employees to see you trying, even if you mess up, because if you try, if you make the effort, you will be given grace, right? And you'll also be seen as a human versus someone who can't mess up. And I think oftentimes we are fearful of the amount of empathy we'll get. We're fearful of the backlash, especially as leaders, if we say the wrong thing and we're on a pedestal speaking for the company. So the more that we can just kind of level set to say that vulnerability, authenticity is the first place to start. Like, I'd rather you say the absolutely wrong thing and have a really large learning moment in front of our employees than not engage with the conversation at all.
I love Megan Carpenter at Microsoft. I think she does comms with her D&I team, had this really great article last summer. And she said, I will give you grace if you give me effort. And I think a lot of white leaders aren't, like you said, Laura, haven't built this muscle and are scared justifiably of screwing up and like not wanting to look foolish, not wanting to look ignorant. And also, like, I think on a deep level, not wanting to hurt people. And when we don't talk about things, especially race, like it feels really poignant right now. And like this past year, like we've broken open a lot of conversations and we're having conversations about race and racism that I never thought we'd be having in the workplace. It's uncomfortable and messy sometimes. And the cost when we don't talk about them is that people of color, especially Black people, especially Indigenous people, like get left behind or get like face that discrimination, and we're just not talking about it. So I'd rather us be a little messy, be uncomfortable for people to make mistakes, because like that's how we learn.
Absolutely. And I think like my hot take on this is it's also how you foster a sense of belonging. I think it is not just about like inclusion and being included, which often, or not often, like sometimes can really have that like tokenizing effect where it is still perpetuating harm against a marginalized team member. I think that like modeling that vulnerability, plus that accountability, that authenticity, all these things we're talking about at the leadership level, speaking as a Black person who works, you know, it's like those are the things that like make me feel like, okay, I belong here. This isn't just performative. This isn't lip service. Like we're all collectively committed to doing this work. So kind of
Ooh, I just had one more thing to add. Can
go for it. Yes, yes.
Dr. Amy Edmondson, who's one of the experts on psychological safety, advises like, you know, we need our leaders to model making mistakes and model that humility. And when we see it at the top, like it makes it safer for us all to take risks and get it wrong. I'm not saying like be careless and get it wrong, but like to stick our necks out, both like on DEI issues and anti-racism issues, but also like in the business sense, like, you know, saying the thing that may be a little wacky, but could be a really, really great idea. Mm-hmm. Or speaking up when everyone's like, oh, everything's fine. And you're like, I think we're about to drive off a cliff. Like,
right.
when our leaders model that, it makes it safer for us all to speak up. And that's really important.
Thank you. Really good thoughts on this question. So to kind of pivot and think about just like individual contributors. And so what about the folks who are not on the senior leadership team? What are some opportunities that like anyone who sits anywhere in the organization has to be able to sort of take on themselves, like as it relates to distributing this work? Like what would you recommend? Like Laura, would you get started, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I love this question. I talk a lot about if you don't know where to start with education, right? And that doesn't mean taking the unconscious bias training. Take the unconscious bias training that your employer has, but it also means educating yourself, right? Most of the work that we do in this space and how we create change in behaviors is understanding how you have navigated through the world, right? And the systems of privilege and barrier and inequity. And so taking your own learning journey can really start to awaken in you what you didn't know, to start finding your own passions in this space, to create empathy, to learn about other communities, to level set some of the biases that we just have because, frankly, we haven't been exposed to many other communities outside our own. And then as well, it'll help start changing your behaviors, right? So once we know better, we do better. And understanding that, the first thing that we can do if you're trying to be an ally is start looking into your own education. Don't hold other people from other underserved identities responsible for educating you, because you can do that yourself. You can certainly start to expand your inner circle, right? Especially when you're on that development journey to say, I actually really don't know people from certain communities. And so how do I actually create meaningful relationships with people outside of my own identity to be able to have conversations? So it's not just seeming like out of the blue or a microaggression when I talk to someone from a certain community about what they're facing. I use the example all the time of myself. My best friend I've had since I was in high school. She's white, I'm Black. And oftentimes she will come to me and say, like, I did something that was like seen as like really messed up and I'm trying to understand what happened. And I love her, so I'm willing to have that conversation with her. We talk about race and race dynamics in the US all the time. But a coworker, when I first started out into my career, asked me how it felt to be, a biracial Black woman in tech. I never had a conversation with that person before. And so that's really performative. And it puts me in a position where I'm bringing up trauma for education that you think I'm responsible for. And so first and foremost, start with the education, start with actually getting to know other experiences, perspectives, backgrounds. And that can be a really great way to just dip your feet in the water, right?
And honestly, I would say, like, if you don't have in real life connections that you can do that with, y'all, the internet is wonderful. Like social media, Twitter, like it is possible for you to like find and at least start listening to different voices and perspectives to help kind of inform your thinking on this, and even find a lot of really great resources that can be helpful to then bring back into those real life conversations in the future. Tara, did you have anything that you wanted to add there?
I love what you had to say, Lara, and it just reminded me, one of my favorite podcasts right now is Here to Slay with Roxanne Gay and Tressie McMillan Cotton. And I love that because I just feel like I get to be a fly on the wall of two exceptionally brilliant Black women. And the conversation isn't for a white audience. They're talking to each other, and there's some things I don't understand. So I'm like, like there's a learning point for me. On their recent episode, there was one piece around like, if you read one book last year on racism, like that's not enough. Like great start. And like you've read one intro book, read a couple more. Find the 201 level books, the 301, the 401, the 601 level, like continue to level up. It's not your education and learning. It's not a one and done. And Stefanie, this reminds me of conversations we've had about how to do the learning without causing harm to people from those communities. And Laura, you were kind of talked around it, but like, I think that's super important. Like, you can't learn at the expense of other people. It's lazy and it's harmful.
Absolutely. And actually, somebody in the comments just shared that they refuse to endure trauma for someone's diversity aha moment. And I mean, the wording I use a lot is like being asked to perform my trauma for the sake of other people's learning who actually don't even see me as fully human anyway. So it's just like not worth the pain. Like, no, thank you. So yes, I think that is an important part and piece of this work, this conversation is like, yes, we can agree that everybody's got to do the work. But we can also universally agree that that means we have to do it in a way that is not perpetuating harm against those folks who, because of their identities, are already potentially experiencing that harm and trauma in ways that maybe we don't even, well, we certainly don't or can't understand, depending, on where we're starting in this journey and kind of where we're coming from. So what role does mid-management kind of play in this whole dynamic in terms of the work that has to happen around diversity, equity, and inclusion? I think we've talked about like senior leaders, we've talked about kind of individual contributors, but the reality is middle management can be like a really influential part of the organization and are some of those like first direct line people leaders in the org. So let's talk about the role that middle management plays here. And just whoever would like to start. Oh, yeah.
I'll unmute then.
Got it.
When you say middle management, I'm thinking about team leaders, and
yes.
I think most of the work that we do, like there's lots of research that shows people leave jobs because they've got bad managers, but also their managers can help grow their career and grow the work and their impact in an organization. So I think team leaders play a really important role in setting the tone on a team around inclusion. And I'm just thinking of like a way that people can do that is like sometimes awkward things come up and we're super uncomfortable. And there's a tendency, at least in my work career, to kind of rush by them and be like, oh, we didn't see that. And a thing that, well, anyone, but especially when a team leader does it because they have the weight of leadership, is just to say, can we just take a pause here? Like, I just want to acknowledge that something just happened. Or I want to acknowledge that this was said. Can we just take a pause? I think it's those little ways that we interrupt dynamics and interrupt things that can either for good or for bad create more or less inclusion. So I think team leaders and middle management are extremely important in what most IC's work looks like at work. So,
and IC, we mean individual contributor for anybody who is not in the tech industry or has not heard that term before. So one thought actually that comes to mind for me is a positive example that I can share from a previous team lead. We were like having just like a conversation about like how our weekend was with a handful of team members. And one of the team members was talking about the work she had been doing in her yard over the weekend. And she said, gosh, my husband, he's such a slave driver. He really was just like, making me work so hard. And this was a team of like all white women, myself. And so our leader stopped and said, hey, like that is totally not the language like that we're going to use here. And like even said, like maybe you would say taskmaster or provided some like other kind of like examples. And honestly, like it felt uncomfortable for me, even like standing there, because it was like, yes, we're not often used to like addressing things in the moment, but the reality is like, great, we like talked about it, we all agreed, not inclusive language, not a thing we're going to say anymore, and like move forward and like learn from that. And I'm so grateful that it was addressed like in that moment, and then you move forward. And I think like normalizing those types of interactions like really go a long way, and modeling some of that like behavior that we have talked about kind of so far. So Lara, I saw that you were unmuting. Like, what do you want to add to this?
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to middle managers, my belief is that they are the first line of defense when it comes to anything diversity, equity, inclusion related. So from a standpoint of holding people accountable and setting the tone for behaviors, the senior most person in the room is the person accountable for setting the tone for what behaviors are acceptable, unacceptable, routine, and creating those cultural norms, if you will, right? And so oftentimes the team leads or middle managers are those senior most people in the room, especially amongst their team, right? We talk about how people don't lead companies, they lead managers, right? So they're the most accountable for behaviors and also creating that psychological safety, calling things out in the moment, normalizing, talking about race, bias, sexism, DEI in general, normalizing, role modeling the learning that they're doing and creating space to have these conversations. Also normalizing taking time to do this work, right? I have a lot of conversations with managers, especially managers of affinity group leaders or anyone taking on an extra role for the company relating to JEDI around the fact that this isn't a nice to have. It's not an extracurricular. This is a company mandated role. They are performing a leadership task. And so as the middle manager, it is on you to make sure that you are representing that in their performance reviews. You're actively asking them about what they're driving and that you're able to represent the leadership skills that they've cultivated in these roles that they're serving in. It's on you to equitably lead and manage each and every single one of your employees, right? We know that diverse teams only succeed to the utmost of their capacity when they're well managed. So that requires you forming relationships with your directs, real relationships where you can ask them the question, what do you need from me? They can feel comfortable and safe responding truthfully, and then you're actively listening so that you can equitably manage them. I get the question all the time, what does equity mean for me as a middle manager? Like, does that mean that I automatically give, like, I use the bike example, right? When you give someone a different bike based off their needs and they're like, does that mean that I automatically give people from underserved communities like more resources? And my first response is ask them. Don't assume what they need. Ask them and then actively listen and act based off of what they need, not based off of what your assumptions are. So middle managers have a lot on their plates as far as to be able to move this work forward. But if not them, then who? Right? They're really the ones at the front line accountable for making sure this work is driven, and senior leadership is accountable for setting the tone as far as expectations for middle managers and what will be let pass as far as middle managers saying like, I don't have time to think about this, and what they're accountable for in their roles.
And what I'm hearing you say is like a lot of skills and capabilities. So when we were building out the job level kind of classifications at Mozilla, we were thinking like, is inclusion, like our expectations of like an entry-level staff person, a team leader, a director, the C-suite, are they different around inclusion? And I learned since I left that the data science team has implemented that. So like, if that's important, that's a way you can build into your system. Like, you know, actually it's an expectation for team leaders to do this work, which is, it's like, just when Lara, when you were talking, I was like, it's not, you know, it's not an entry-level thing to be a team leader and to understand and to listen and to build rapport and to be able to hear and be flexible like that. So I think you can articulate that in a job level guide and get people on the same page, what the expectations are and what you need to kind of hit that next level.
Yeah, those clear expectations for like advancement are, I think, table stakes for creating like an equitable environment where everybody can thrive and where you have those documented ways to like prove and like measure sort of performance, but attached to, you know, inclusion and some of these other things that can be tougher to measure. Absolutely. So thinking about like the tone that's being set from the senior leadership to the team leads and kind of fostering this environment of like learning and accountability, how do you get a new hire up to speed in that environment quickly? Like, let's talk about that. So like Stefanie is starting next week. How do you start to like foster that, that like behavior moving forward, but like kind of from day one? Like, what does that look like?
When you say fostering behavior of moving forward, are you referring to like fostering that expectation around an employee's role? Or are you talking about more like bringing them in, ramping them up, making them feel included?
Good question and clarification. So really more like ramping them up into that inclusive culture. So like if we have like fostered this like inclusive culture and that is sort of like the expectation, how as somebody new coming into the organization, do you get them ramped up in that way, like in terms of like the inclusive culture aspect of it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can answer from what I'm hearing you say. So I think
Okay.
part of it is how do we ramp up, like say, Stefanie, to make sure that when you're onboarding, you have a really solid foundation of what the company is, core values, cultural norms, and what's expected as far as inclusive behaviors, as well as making you understand and feel included as though you belong, psychologically safe. So I think that first off, that happens before day one, right? So typically what I see is that managers who reach out prior to day one, constant communication, validation that you don't need to prove yourself because we hired you because we know that you will add value to our team, to our products, and to our culture, which oftentimes we don't talk about, right? We've, gotten away from using culture fit. It's not a culture fit.
I was going to say, yeah, culture add. Absolutely. In my opinion, the most equitable language around this for sure.
Exactly. So what you're adding, you're already adding value day one, and we trust that you will add value. I also think it's a matter of really giving the employee time to figure it out, right? Having multiple resources and even someone who's not the direct manager, not even on the team, to be able to help the employee navigate through all of the new nuances of a company, right? And to be able to ask the questions around the, questions that they may be afraid to ask around cultural norms, around the environment, the workplace, things of that nature. I also, what I keep going back to is this idea of socially inclusive design, right? We talk a lot about accessibility from a standpoint of visible disabilities, to the typical ones we think about. But when we think about socially inclusive design, that can also be implemented from an onboarding experience to make sure that we are designing onboarding and designing an inclusive culture for those with the least amount of prior knowledge, privilege coming in. There are a lot of unspoken norms around how we navigate cultural spaces that we cannot assume people understand, right? And so if we start designing for everyone, right, and for underserved communities and identities first, that then creates a better system in general for everyone, because we're uplifting everyone. We're giving them what they need to equally grow, succeed, and thrive, right? So I would say it comes back to these socially inclusive design principles. Like, what are the unspoken rules of engagement that you may know, but that someone else might not know? And how can we test this among employees who have been here for a while to say, like, what were the things that you wanted to know coming in? And how can we make sure that we are highlighting and elevating what we're expecting of you, but also that this culture is one that seeks to have everyone feel like they belong instead of fitting in, and one that seeks to make sure that everyone is equally getting the opportunities and thriving and succeeding, right?
I love that. And I just want to say, in a remote environment, all of these things, those unspoken norms, I think are even more important. And I think they're always important, but like, you're right. I think like the norms and the cultural norms and like ensuring that folks like understand what that looks like, but also just designing in a way that is more accessible and inclusive for all, like those are the more nuanced, I think, parts of this work that like we are starting to really see companies like lean into and acknowledge as like really important parts of the overall sustainability and like success of a strategy, kind of as it relates to this. Tara, what would you like to add?
I love what you had to say about socially inclusive design. And I think, yeah, inclusive design is a huge passion of mine. And I think that's where the DEI work comes into the product and services that we offer, but also thinking about like what the employee experience is like. It was cool. I was chatting with someone who's a user research designer who's on a people team in quite a large company. And she thinks about like, what is the employee experience? Is it employee centric? And I think often with like onboarding procedures, there's a lot. So there's a lot of information. A lot of companies I've worked with talk about it as the fire hose. So like, how do we do that in an employee-centric way? I think checking in with people like a week or a couple of weeks later to be like, hey, how's everything going? Like, do you have all the things you need? Just want to know, like lots of people have questions. Like, what do you have questions about? So inviting that people to ask what they might not know, which is hard. Lara, when you were talking, it reminded me of a really amazing experience I had when I first saw a massage therapist. And she was explicit about all the different options. She's like, we can have music or not. You can have shoulder pillows or not. There's a heating thing. Some people like it and then they like me to turn it off. And just by making all of those things explicit and visible, it gave me permission. And some of the things I didn't even know I could ask for. Like, and still I found myself like, oh, like it's a little warm. Could you turn it down? And like, I was like, she invited me to do that. So I was like, hey, I'm a little hot. Could you turn it down? She's like, thank you for telling me what you needed. So she made the options visible. When I asked for something that I needed, she was like, thank you. I think in a global context, people talk about common sense and that's kind of tricky. So I think codes of conduct can be really useful, especially if they're written in plain English and talk about specific behaviors. So I really loved we called it our community participation guide at Mozilla. And it called out some of the things like, don't touch people's hair without asking. Don't touch people's tattoos without consent. Don't touch a woman's pregnant belly or someone's mobility aid. Like, I think it's one thing to say, be respectful, but by calling out those specific things that we know are problems, it helps because we had staff in 16 different countries, and what's common practice in Spain may be very different than what's common in Taiwan. So talking about specific behaviors and what we want to see and what we don't tolerate is really useful there.
Yes, those examples, are so good. So we just have a few minutes left, I think, for kind of the last issue or kind of topic that we talked about here. Probably makes sense to think about like success markers. So if your organization is in fact being successful or experiencing success at distributing this DEI work, could you share just like what might that look like? How can we tell that we're succeeding kind of in this area? Lara, would you want to get started?
Yeah, definitely. So the first thing that I say is the only way that you can tell if you're succeeding is by setting a baseline, right? Too often we end up just kind of throwing the kitchen sink at the wall and saying like, all right, what worked and what didn't work, right? But we really need to make sure that we are establishing a baseline, establish a data set that is really inclusive of programs, but also employee engagement, mindset, well-being, right? And look at things like belonging and how do we measure that? How do we ask employees questions regularly around that, as well as equity, feeling heard, and then establish that, ask the same questions over and over again, right? On a biannual or annual basis. Sometimes we also do pulse just to get an understanding of what's happening. That way, each organization, you can kind of get a really good baseline understanding of where we are at a holistic company level, where each organization is. And if you're asking specific questions, like for instance, are microaggressive jokes tolerated or identity-based jokes tolerated in your organization? Then you can start really understanding where you need to focus your energies, right? And what questions you need to ask more about, what questions you need to ask less about. And then I'd also say that going back to what we originally talked about, Tara's focus on this first, when talking about what's the holistic strategy, where do you want to go as an organization, setting some commitments before you do anything else around where you think you are doing an assessment. There are a lot of really great assessments out there from from a holistic company perspective. And then where do you want to be in 3 years or 5 years? Where does your interest lie? What do you want your employees knowing, feeling, doing? And how do you want your company to look internally and then externally to candidates and the community? So that's a really great way to then set the tone for what you're going to go after. And you can really look at your programs to say, like, are we going towards what we want to do, or are we just doing things because we think we need to, or they're performative? And then we can consistently check in with our employees to make sure that our employees are feeling included, feeling as though they belong, thriving, checking to make sure that we are building well-managed, diverse teams. And when I talk about diverse, define what diversity means, right? Diversity, no one person can be a diverse candidate or diverse, right? Hey, when people say that, it's like it's a euphemism for calling people what they are. In my case, I'm a biracial Black woman in tech, right? And so if we can start defining that by, communities. So for instance, at Axon, we're looking at making sure that our diverse teams represent the communities that we're serving. So look at the demographics in the US or in the UK or Vietnam or wherever you have your companies, to make sure that your teams are reflecting the communities that they're building products for, right? So those are some tangible ways that you can start measuring and really seeing that success. And again, understanding that there are things that are going to move the needle overnight. There are some leading indicators that we can look at. And then there are some lagging indicators that are going to take a little bit for us to see significant change. And setting those expectations around how long you should expect to see change, right? Mm-hmm. What you should be expecting to see, to make sure that you're not getting a knee-jerk reaction from your C team saying, we expected this to move faster than it is, right?
Right. Yeah. Framing those expectations, like, so important as part of this conversation. Thank you so much for all of your insights today. Tara, like, what would you add? I know you are such a data-driven DEI practitioner as well. So, like, I'm excited.
I'm a giant data nerd. I just want to echo what Lara said. I think it's really important to have really clear goals that move the strategy forward, but clear, measurable, actionable goals that are part of the company's OKR structure. We measure things that matter, and we hold ourselves accountable to business outcomes that are important, and DEI is one of them. So put it in the way that you measure everything else, whether that's like shifting representation at the company, if it's around retention of specific demographics, if it's about closing gaps on your engagement survey around key issues where people are having a really different experience. Like, write them down, measure them. This is tough. Like, nobody has, no country, no company, no organization has this completely figured out. So take an experimental mindset and be like, okay, like, we're trying to retain women in tech. Like, what does the research say? What are other people doing? What's the bet that we're going to place? Like, maybe it's coaching, maybe it's making people's individual goals visible. I don't know, but like, be clear about that and then see if you move the needle. And if you don't, be honest about that and hold yourselves accountable, and then kind of recalibrate and try again.
Yes. I mean, everything comes back to this like iterative process and growth mindset is what it really feels like, the crux of all of this, kind of regardless of the level that we're talking about here. So that is a wrap for today. Thank you, everybody who was able to join us live. I will encourage you to check out Seed&Spark's LinkedIn page as a really good place to see future events like this. We'll be hosting office hours live on a monthly basis happening mid-month. So we'll share the next invite soon. And just another thank you again to our guests today for sharing their expertise and advice as we were talking about distributing the work across the org. Everybody who registered for this event, you will get an email with a recording and some additional resources. If you're interested in receiving that email and you hadn't registered for the event, you can email inclusion@seedandspark.com and we can get you on that list. So thank you again, everyone, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you next time. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yay, this was so